Right then, guys, let's get started. So, welcome to the Q&A. So, the idea is here, some of you have gave me some questions. I'm going to go through them, give you some pointers, and hopefully get those questions answered for you. So, let's get straight into this. So, our first question here is, what are the key differences between the snatch and the clean and jerk? Okay, so with the snatch, it is one movement from the floor straight into our overhead position. So, normally what you'd find is that the hands are slightly wider than where you are for the clean, and that is because you're going to be taking that movement straight overhead and you're catching that in a deep squat position. So for our mobility, or to get into that position, it requires a little bit more sort of mobility. So by taking our hands wider, it just allows or reduces the stress that is put on those shoulders and then enabling us to get into that bottom position. Whereas the clean and jerk is a two-phase movement. So the clean is when we move the bar from the floor to our shoulders, and then the jerk is from the shoulders into the overhead position. Now, with the snatch and the clean, sometimes we receive those movements in a power position. So a power position is when we receive that bar. So in the snatch, when we receive the bar overhead or on our shoulders for the clean, in a position where our hips are above that parallel line, okay? So as soon as we sit lower than so our hips are lower than our knee, that is what we class as our full lift, okay? Or in CrossFit, that's when we call it a squat snatch or a squat clean, which doesn't really exist because a clean and a snatch is just that bottom position. We've caught it in the bottom, okay? So the full movement, snatch and clean, is when we receive it in the lowest position, where the power-based movements of the power snatch and the power clean is when we receive that bar hips above knee angle, okay? And then the jerk is that there's three different jerk variations. We've got split jerk, push jerk, and the squat jerk. So split jerk, we go into like a half lunge position. Push jerk, we end up somewhere probably between like a quarter squat. And then our squat jerk is we're riding into that full squat with the bar overhead. So hopefully that has sort of answered a few of your questions there. So question number 2 is, why do you need to improve mobility for Olympic lifts? So mobility is crucial in Olympic weightlifting because if we have, say, tight shoulders, okay, we won't necessarily get into the positions for our overhead squats because we just won't be able to hold that bar in that wide grip overhead position and ride down, okay? So our shoulders are going to reduce the range of motion that we have got overhead that is then going to prevent us getting into that deep squat range that we need for our overhead squat, which is similar to the positions that we need when we go into our full snatch, okay? Now, if we've got tight hips and tight ankles, this is going to affect our squat mechanics, okay? So ankles is going to reduce the level that the knees can track over the toes, okay? Now, we want good ankle mobility to allow those knees to track over the toes that is going to allow us to sink nice and deep in our squat. If we can't track our knees over our toes, we end up then sitting really far back and losing balance in any of our squat variations. So if that is an air squat, we're going to start to lose our balance. So what is going to happen when we're in a front squat and an overhead squat, okay? And obviously with our hips there, that's again, it's just going to prevent us getting into the bottom positions for our snatches and our cleans. And obviously you won't be able to sort of go into squat jerks. Obviously if you did have a mobility constraint that was ankles and hips, you'd probably go for a split jerk anyway, not a squat jerk. So for I have relatively good hip and ankle mobility. I can still get into a deep position in a snatch and a clean, but I still split jerk because I wouldn't necessarily say I've got insane mobility that enables me to keep a close grip and sink into a full squat jerk position. So how do you assess, so this is question number 3, sorry, how do you assess if you have efficient technique, okay? Now, the first thing here is you want to film your lifts, okay? By filming our lifts, we can actually identify where our technique is breaking down, okay? And obviously it's not the best thing to sort of do here, but we can start to watch different YouTube videos and different athletes training and sort of go, okay, so this is how we lift, but this is how this athlete lifts. So what is the difference there? Okay, perfect. They're keeping the bar super close to the thighs. Let me practice that because that bar is nowhere near my thigh. So that is something that I'm going to work on. So it gives us the pointers that we can sort of use to assess our technique compared to other lifters. Okay, the other thing that we can sort of do is if we are in the full movement now, another way that we can assess our technique is by using different apps on our phone that assesses bar path. Okay, now bar path tells us a really big picture. Okay, there's optimal bar paths, okay, and there's unoptimal bar paths. Now, if we use an app like weightlifting analysis, that's a free app on the Apple App Store, it's going to track the path that bar takes from the start position all the way through the movement and into that overhead position. Now we could then start to look at research and go, okay, so what is a good bar path? What does my bar path look like compared to what is a good bar path? Okay, and where does mine sit on the different variations of bar paths that are commonly seen? Okay. Now, that shows us then that we can work on different phases of our movement. So, for example, if that bar is coming away from the shin in that first angle or that first part of the lift in that start position to the end of the first pull, we could look at movements that are sort of highlight that. So it could be snatch, grip, deadlifts, just to really emphasize how we want that bar to move in that first phase of the lift. And then we could sort of look, okay, so when we get into extension, I'm driving backwards, causing that bar to come away from me. So it's giving us an area that we can really try and specify in our program that we can then use the correct exercises to fix that issue in terms of our bar path. Okay. Now, the other things that we want to sort of assess, and again, I suppose this is a little bit sort of like from filming the movement, but it's also making sure that that movement is nice and fluid. So we can start to watch it and be like, so before I explain, so with the snatch and the clean, we want to ideally see that bar is accelerating through the lift. So we might start off quite slow to start with, but as we build through that movement, as we get closer to maximal extension, the speed should increase. Now, what we could see from the video by filming our movements is that I get to sort of mid-thigh and I'm sort of stopping that movement before I'm changing direction. So it's one of those like areas where we're sort of hitching that bar. So again, it tells us on areas that we need to improve. If we've got a good technique, I'm keeping it close to my body, but I'm then hitching that bar, it's telling us that we've got like a speed issue, so or a momentum constraint that we can work on. So we could look at slow snatches or movements that sort of highlight that or where that hitch happens. If that hitch happens mid-thigh, we might really want to start to attack loads of hang cleans and hang snatches that are really going to try and smooth out that acceleration issue there. So question number 4 is, when do we focus on strength versus technique? Now, I would always go for technique is the biggest thing here. There's no point working on strength specifically if we are not moving that bar efficiently. Okay, so if we are catching that bar in a quarter squat position and then riding down to that full position, that for me highlights that we've got a technical issue that we need to assess. If we are reaching the bottom of the movement, okay, and we're losing balance, the weight is transitioning to our toes and our heels are lifting in that bottom of a snatch and a clean, that again is highlighting that we've got a technical flaw in the movement. We could go into a split jerk and catch the bar with a slight bend and then we're having to lock out. And again, that is highlighting that we've got a technical inefficiency within that movement that we need to assess first. So I always say that if you go over to my website, and I attach it into the link below this as well, but you want to sort of assess your movements on the key performance indicators. Now, you're probably going to see that there's some crosses and ticks within the areas of that lift that we want, but ideally we want to sort of see more ticks than crosses. Okay, that would show us then that we are more of an efficient lifter. We're never going to get 100% unless you are absolutely perfect, but you want to probably get towards, say, like if there's 21 points, I want you to get to about 18 of those. So 18 of those areas are correct. You're hitting all of those 18 areas, and there's like 2 to 3 areas that we can sort of fine tune. Now, you'll probably be able to fine tune those areas with technical movements, but also by just cueing the thing that we can work on. Okay, so for example, as I start the movement, my hips are shooting, and that creates me to bring that bar away from my shin. Okay, so all I'm going to cue there is just push the floor away, maintain the angle from hip to shoulder. Okay, rather than okay, we need to go and do some technical movements there. But so yeah, so if you assess your movement on the key performance indicators and you've got a few adjustments that you could make, I would then say, okay, so your goal here is we need to try and ramp that percentage work up. So we're building strength and getting stronger. If you've got, say, 10 areas out of those 21 that are correct, you've got more areas that you need to improve, so that you're going to spend more time on improving your technique. So it might well be like, okay, so we're finding that we're not transitioning from the high hang to the hang very well. So we're losing that momentum or that technique as we move from the knee into extension. So that is going to be the area that we are going to work on. Okay, but all areas, even if we are trying to improve our technique or trying to get stronger on the bar, we're always building strength. Okay, yes, okay, we are improving our technique and putting more weight on the bar, but because we are moving better, we could argue to say that we're actually now stronger because we're able to maintain positions and lift more efficiently. Okay, so let's have a look at the next question. So how would you suggest structuring your training program? Okay, so if we have a look at a standard program or a standard session, okay, I think there's key areas that need to be in that program. Firstly, I would always suggest a warm-up. Okay, I do not recommend any lifter, and I always say to the lifters that I coach as well that like we don't want to be just going straight into the gym and straight onto a bar. Okay, even though you might not necessarily say that you've got mobility constraints, you need to still prime your mobility to get the very best out of that bar. Okay, so we'd always start the warm-up, and it might well be a little bit of time on the bike just to sort of get the blood pumping, and then we're going to be spending 5 to 10 minutes of mobility work. I personally would only spend sort of 5 minutes and make that a 5-minute mobility flow. So for that 5 minutes, I'm not necessarily going to stop and rest. It's just going to be a continuous flow between movements to prime me for my session. And that 5-minute mobility flow would be specific to my mobility constraints. So for me, thoracic and ankle mobility are the two areas that I really need to work. And I find that my movement feels so much better when I've done that 5 minutes of mobility flow. On a general level, then we'd probably want to have a look at a priming movement. So a priming movement is sort of looking to cue, okay, or looking to sort of expose you to the area that we want to try and improve. So if it's, say, for example, we're cutting the extension short, it's more of like a hop rather than getting into our triple extension position. We might go, okay, we're gonna start the session with some high hang snatches, where we're really going to try and focus on getting nice and tall, seeing a nice straight line from the hips, knees, and ankles, and thinking about squeezing the quads and glutes and focusing on getting that vertical jumping motion. Before I go into my main block of work, which would be, say, sets of 3 snatches, but I'm really going to try and emphasize that high hang position or finding maximal extension, but I'm now going to start to squeeze the gas on the percentage. Can I lift heavier but still maintain that position that I found in my priming movement? Our next exercise from there then would probably be some sort of pulls or squats that is looking to sort of strengthen the areas that are needed in the snatch, clean and jerk. Okay, and then from there then we'd look for some assistance work, and the assistance work could just be some sort of general bodybuilding movements, hinge exercises, squatting patterns, pushes and pulls. Okay, so I would always go within our program. So if you train 3-4 times a week, your accessory movements would be squatting variations. So I'm not talking now your squats. Think of that as a strength-based movement that should be in a program. But you've got 4 areas that want to be your accessory movements. So we've got squatting movements, which would be things like split squats. It could well be goblet squats. It could be leg press. It could be sled push. Okay, as a few exercises. Then we want to see some hinge movements. Now, our hinge movements could be good mornings with Romanian deadlifts. We want to see some pulling variations. So bent over rows like pull downs, pull-ups, pen lay rows, etc., etc. And then we want to see some pressing movements as well. Now, pressing movements would be strict press, push press, bench press for certain, for different areas. It could well be a Z press, a soap press, depending on what the purpose of this training block was looking at. And then I would always recommend popping in a little bit of core work at the end of that session, just because the core is super sort of valuable within our Olympic lifts. Okay. Now we want to sort of train the core the same as we train any other muscle. Okay. So if I want to get a stronger core, I don't want to just be doing plank. Planks are brilliant, but I might look at sort of going GHD sit-ups so I can load that movement over time and increase the weight that is lifted within that lift. Okay, I could be looking at windmills. So I'm now sort of focusing on a lateral movement that is going to be really targeting my obliques. And again, the weight is the area that is going to show me that my obliques are getting stronger. Okay, so I'd always sort of recommend training your core just the same as any other muscle and start loading it and using that as the parameter that is showing us that we are getting stronger. Okay. So next question from there. Perfect. It sort of flows on from what we've just been saying there, but assistance exercises for common weaknesses. So, there's different areas that we could sort of look at here. So, first one might well be that it's our pulling speed, pulling strength off the floor that is reducing us snatching and cleaning our next PB. Okay, now we could start to be looking at them. We're going to overload the movement from the blocks. Okay, so we're going to start just below the knee in a low hang position. It could well be I'm going to start in a hang position and start to say potentially working 120 to 130% of our 1 rep max lift, but looking to overload that portion of the pull. We then might start taking it down to the floor, working 100 to 110%, but now sort of still maintaining the perfect positions that we are still looking to aim to hit within the snatch and the clean, but looking to put that into the deadlift. So it's not conventional deadlifts. A snatch grip deadlift is a deadlift that moves the same way that we would go and snatch on the bar, and it would be the same as how we want to clean. Okay, so thinking about the first pull, second pull, keeping it close to the shins and thighs. And then we could also be taking a look at deficit-based movements, so where we stand on a plate, so the floor is further away, that is going to really start to attack the end range of that movement. Okay, that's going to help us generate more force as we get back to just a standard movement from the floor. We could also look at snatch pulls and clean pulls. I'm not a huge fan of pulls, only because we get into a position where it becomes a bit more of an arm-based movement. We're thinking about pulling that bar. I love deadlift variations, deadlifts from the a standard deadlift, rack pulls. It could well be deficit deadlifts, like I've just said. Another great exercise is a floating snatch pull or a clean pull, where it's basically a deadlift, but we're not coming all the way to the floor. We're kissing the floor and going straight back into the next lift, as that really intensifies the fact that we need to keep the weight in the midfoot rather than allowing it to transition to toes and heels. If explosiveness is an issue here, we could start to take a look at power snatch and power clean. So explosiveness, we could look at this and go, okay, when would we assess that we have an issue with explosiveness? Now, the first thing here is that the apex of the pull to where we fixate, so the height that the bar reaches to the point where we sit underneath it and stop that movement in our deep squat position, if that is quite minimal, we can sort of go, okay, so to take us to this next level, we need to improve the explosiveness and that pulling strength. Okay, so we're going to be taking a look now at power snatches and power cleans. And again, these power-based movements could be done off the blocks. That is really going to help us think about getting from just the knee and thinking about changing direction as rapidly as possible. Okay. Now, if we have if we're sort of like catching the clean and it's sort of like bringing us forwards and we're rounding our shoulders and dropping our elbows, we might want to start to take a look at front rack movements that are going to strengthen the front rack. So movements that I would like to start to look at here is a zombie squat. This is really sort of good at getting your core to work with you and maintain that nice vertical line out the bottom. We then could look at overloading your front squats once we've done some work on zombie squats. Adding in pauses at the bottom. We could work off front squats to the pins just to work on generating the force at the bottom and maintaining perfect position. And we could also look at doing 1 1/4 squats just to overload that bottom portion of the squat. And again, that is really going to try and emphasize that we're going to try and maintain that vertical line and not drop forwards as we start to press, because we see people sit into the squat and then as they stand, they round and they drop forward. So movements like pause movements, 1 1/4 really starts to highlight that, and we'll start to try and break that down. So weak pulls, explosiveness, and improving the strength out of the clean are probably the issues that I would see commonly, and those are the things there that I would put into a program to try and combat them. So our next question from there is how to improve the timing through the transition. So I'm assuming that this person that's answered this or asked this question is quite familiar with the snatch and clean and jerks, and they are now looking to just start to tweak their technique to try and squeeze out a few more kilos on that bar. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is probably a technical flaw and it needs you to sort of, dial in your technique. I would start to think about the words that we could use to cue that lift. Okay, so if we have an issue through transition, it might well be that we're cutting that extension short. So it might well be that we need to try and think about staying patient, getting a little bit taller. Can we squeeze up towards the ceiling and hold that position? Okay, it might well be that we need to think about trying to keep our chest and chin over the bar and not leaning backwards. So again, we're trying to squeeze out as much of that vertical line as possible. Movements that we could do to really try and re-emphasize this again is our movements like our high hang snatches and high hang cleans, where we're going to work from that power position, so hip crease for the snatch and obviously top part of the thigh for the cleans, and just working on that vertical dip and jumping hard to get that extension. Now obviously we're going to probably keep this no heavier than 75% of our 1 rep max, and probably start to focus on more volume rather than reducing the volume and ramping up that weight, just so we can practice weight in the midfoot, dip, jump as hard as we can. Okay, and we could also start to look here at using tempos. So it could well be we are going to transition into our full snatch, but keep it super slow through the first pull, through the second pull, but as soon as we reach that bar into our hip crease, emphasizing what we have just done in the high hang snatch and thinking about that vertical jump. How high can I jump? So not necessarily thinking about dropping under and how fast can we hit that bottom position. Instead, we want the emphasis to be how tall can we get. Okay, so high hang snatches could well be our priming base movement, and slow snatches might well be our main movement that is re-emphasizing and looking to expose that high hang position that we need to improve on. Lovely. So another one here is cues for staying explosive. Okay, so here we want to try and think about flat feet. Okay, flat feet driving through the floor, thinking about, again, very similar to the transition there, thinking about getting nice and tall. Okay, we don't want to rush underneath to get underneath that bar and cut that explosive phase short. So again, the biggest cue word here, flat feet, and think about jumping hard and jumping high. Okay, give as much velocity on that bar as possible. The more velocity that we put on that heavy bar, the easier and the more time that we have got to move around it and get into the positions that we need to get into. Okay, now We probably also want to try and think, or the movements that we could use for this would probably be movements like our power snatches. We could start to work on power snatches from the block. So just setting the blocks up to our hang position, very similar to the question before, to really think about generating the force through the floor. And it's probably another good word to use here is how whenever we go into our power snatches, think about being aggressive and really thinking about I'm going to drive hard through the floor, maintaining our positions, but flat feet, jump hard, and really try and get aggressive into our extension phase. Okay, so that is the end of our questions. Hopefully, this has answered your questions. You've got a little bit from this. Obviously, that is why you have watched this video. If you've got any other questions or any comments that you'd like to sort of make, drop them in the comments below. Look forward to sort of seeing what you got, what you have to say, and if you have got any questions, I'll sort of help you out and give you some answers on that. Okay, thank you very much for coming. I'll see you soon.